Texas A&M stands alone atop the SEC standings through the first 2 months of the season. Who would have predicted that? Not us. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John and I are going to run through several true or false scenarios as we evaluate the college football playoff picture as it pertains to the SEC, and also a hot seat update. And of course, we will have our Week 10 picks against the spread. But first, we start in College Station. John, I was there on Saturday night. We felt like this was a coin flip type of game. It's kind of the way it played out. First half, LSU dominated the play, but were unable to take advantage of some scoring opportunities. And I had the feeling in the press box of like, LSU let them hang around too long, and this thing might turn. It did. Texas A&M changed quarterbacks, benching Connor Wigman in favor of Marcel Reed, and that plus some Garrett Nussmeier interceptions turned the tide. And so now here we are, Texas A&M, first place in the standings. So question is this. Do you feel like at this moment now, Texas A&M is the biggest threat to Georgia in the SEC to win the conference championship, or do you still see a different team as a bigger threat to Georgia should they make it to Atlanta?
I just think when you look at the schedule and the record, A&M might be that threat. Georgia won't have a chance to get A&M on the field. It's already beaten Texas. Way back in preseason, I thought the Aggies could make the college football playoff. Changed my mind after watching them against Notre Dame. Now I'm changed my mind again, as we're wont to do. But the thing about it, when you look at college football this year, the SEC in particular, teams that are expected to be maybe a cut above everybody else really aren't. And it's kind of a bunch of teams that could make the playoff, we think, or win a big game. It changes almost week to week. So, yeah, I think it's natural to be high on A&M at this point. But it won a game because its starting quarterback wasn't performing well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's when you're deciding, and it lost to Notre Dame because its starting quarterback didn't perform. So who's your starting quarterback? It's almost as though the way the Aggies won that game against LSU was significant, and it went with a different quarterback and really a completely different offensive approach from pro-style passing game to a running quarterback. Now, is that what you're going with the rest of the way? Is that how you beat Texas? I don't know, but I think there's still some questions about the A&M offense. What does it need to do? And I don't think you can always flip a switch and change offense. LSU looked like it had never seen a running quarterback, like it didn't think, oh, that guy's allowed to run the ball? Gosh, never saw that coming.
Yeah, that was a really poor coaching effort by Brian Kelly and his staff after halftime when Marcel Reed came into the game. Because it's not like we hadn't seen Marcel Reed before. He started 3 games while Connor Wigman was hurt. So there ought to have been some film on him, a little bit of preparation on him, knowing that he did start 3 games this season. And so, yeah, by knocking Wigman out of the game, not by injury, but by as much as they sacked him and his poor performance, really by knocking him out of the game, LSU hurt itself. It shot itself in the foot because it's like, whoa, wait a second. We didn't prepare for the backup here. It was really a bad look for LSU and just being totally flummoxed by the existence of a read option. But I want to follow up on the thoughts on the quarterback situation because that's where my head's at too. You know, after the game, there was some conversation in the press room about, well, this is probably the last we've seen of Connor Wigman, right? And I disagreed with that because I think with this particular A&M team, Mike Elko might just have to keep an open mind and play the matchups. Like if he needs the passing quarterback in a particular game and they can actually protect Wigman, which they couldn't do in the first half against LSU, well, then he might need to use him. If it's against a defense that's more vulnerable to the run, well, then Marcel Reed is your guy. And I feel like years ago, maybe because of Steve Spurrier, there was this willingness to, if necessary, juggle two quarterbacks. And now I don't think we see a lot of the top teams do that anymore. It just, coaches don't like doing it. The quarterbacks don't like doing it. But I think sometimes the situations call for it. And I really think Texas A&M's best chance might be to play the hot hand, to play the situation, play to your opponent's weakness almost, and maybe have to juggle Wigman and Marcel Reed. What do you think about that? Are you done on Wigman? Do you think it's Marcel Reed's offense from here, or what do you think about this juggling the two approach?
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's A&M just won a really big game, and it came from behind in doing so after being dominated in the first half. So that pretty much gives you a roadmap of what you want to do from here on out. It's telling Mike Elko, you got to be flexible. You got to be willing to make a switch. He's done it a couple of times. Go back to that A&M game with Notre Dame. I thought it was a horrible mistake on his part to just keep trotting Wigman out there when what he was doing wasn't working. I think A&M, if it had done the same thing it did against LSU, could have beat Notre Dame and would be unbeaten right now. So I think that's the plan from here on out. You're right. Steve Spurrier did it very effectively. I remember even before Steve Spurrier, I remember Bobby Bowden went into a game. This is way back in like 1979. Bobby Bowden went into a game with two quarterbacks, Jimmy Jordan and Wally Woodham, and rotated them. He just played them. It was a design thing, and it worked. I think that is a rare exception, but maybe A&M could be another exception.
Mm-hmm. After the game, and this got a lot of attention, Mike Elko's comments after the game. I wrote a column about it and then a follow-up story, because after the game, Mike Elko made a quote that was very eyebrow-raising. I mean, my eyebrows shot up when he said it, and I was not the only reporter in the room that had this reaction. So I want to read you the quote, John, tell you what Mike Elko said afterward, and get your interpretation. So here was Mike Elko when asked about why he's been able to experience year one success, not just at Texas A&M, but at Duke before that. Elko's quote was, quote, "We back up our actions. We're very honest. We're very open. This is a real program. It's not fake. It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody. This is a real program." End quote. When I heard that, my mind immediately went to Jimbo Fisher, the politician running this program, and then particularly the words talking fast and BSing everybody. I mean, Jimbo Fisher had a well-known reputation for being the fastest talking coach in America. Mike Elko is aware of this reputation. He worked under Jimbo Fisher for 4 years before becoming the head coach at Duke and then being hired back by Texas A&M. Now, in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of speculation as to whether Elko was throwing a veiled jab at Jimbo Fisher, or was he maybe throwing a jab at Brian Kelly? Because the talking fast and BSing everybody kind of sounds like Jimbo. But the line, "It's not a politician running this program," well, let's remember, Brian Kelly earned his college degree in political science. His father was an alderman in the Boston area, and Brian Kelly briefly after college worked in politics. He staffed for a state senator and then pivoted away from politics and got into coaching. So there was some debate as to whether Elko was throwing shade at Jimbo, or was he throwing shade at Brian Kelly, or both at the same time. Well, then Mike Elko came out on Monday and said, "You guys are all ridiculous. I wasn't throwing shade at anybody," Mike Elko said, and he said it would be asinine for anybody in the media to think that he was throwing shade with that comment post-game. So I thought he was talking about Jimbo. I will engage with the argument that he was throwing some shade at Brian Kelly as well. What's your thoughts here, John? Do you buy that he wasn't throwing shade at anybody? Do you think it was one more so than the other?
Of course he was throwing shade. Just let it go. Throw the shade and then leave. Don't come back with a apologize like, "How dare you think I was throwing shade?" I just happened to think of that after I've won one of the biggest games of my career. that I want to comment on fast-talking, political inclined coaches. Of course he was. And let's not overlook the offense, the obvious. You got it right the first time. Jimbo Fisher, a noted speed talker. And, you could say he A&M fans, I think, were infatuated with him at the beginning. I'm sure he was great at smoozing the boosters. He was.
Yes.
That's a gift he has. That's what he was doing. Brian Kelly doesn't talk as fast as Jimbo. And I don't see any reason for him to do that to Brian Kelly. He may meet Brian Kelly again. He's not meeting Jimbo again.
Bingo.
That's done. So that was safe. If you want to stretch this out and extend your imagination, maybe he wasn't just taking shots at Jimbo for no good reason. I mean, Jimbo did give him a job. Why would he feel inclined to? Maybe it was a recruiting angle involved here, because he's contrasting what used to be Texas A&M. We got this fast-talking politician here. He'll get you in here. We'll give you some NIL money. We'll all go live happily ever after. No, he's talking about, no, we're a real program. We want real players. We want real people. That's what we're about. We're more of a blue-collar team now. We don't care about the money. We just want to win, and that's what we'll do. I immediately... Usually when coaches are talking and they're taking a stance on something and having a platform, I always suspect recruiting's involved. And it so happened that A&M got two or three commitments right after that win. So maybe he's the politician.
I had that thought, because it would be a very political thing to throw a veiled elbow at someone. And then when the media takes it the way you wanted them to take it and runs with it, you criticize the media and say, no, shame on you. That's not what I was doing, when we all know, like, I think it was what you were doing. I agree with you. I still think he was referencing Jimbo. I do think the angle to it. And what's lost in all this is, before he made that comment about fast-talking politicians full of BS, he said that before he got there was the perception of Texas A&M that it was all about NIL and mercenaries. And now that's starting to change. Well, I mean, that's a little bit of a veiled shot at Jimbo too, right? If A&M had that reputation for building its program with mercenaries, well, who was in charge of the program? Jimbo was. So, yeah, I think this was a shot at Jimbo, and used for your reasons, for recruiting reasons, to say, hey, that's not what we're about anymore. We're a real program. We'll develop you. This is a place that's got real coaches. Come play for me now. And he managed to do it, and then apologize on the other side and try to make the media look like the fools.
They're all mercenaries now. But what he's saying is, we'll develop our mercenaries. We'll make our mercenaries better.
That's right. All right, John, let's get into some true or false scenarios. We may revisit Texas A&M in this segment here, but let's start with the hot seat. So I want to cycle through a few coaches here, and we can make a pit stop and unpack each situation. So true or false, let's start with the guy who was on what I felt like was the hottest seat in college football coming into this season. Now, some could say it was Billy Napier. I gave Billy Napier the silver medal in the preseason hot seat standings. I gave Sam Pittman the gold coming into the season, and Sam Pittman gave himself the gold in the hot seat standings. If you recall, in July at SEC Media Days, Sam Pittman, when asked about being on the hot seat list, he said, "Not only am I on the list, I'm at the front of the list." And he seemed to kind of enjoy just embracing reality. Well, now Arkansas is 5-3. They have Louisiana Tech left on the schedule, so that probably should get them to 6 wins. And then they have 3 rivalry games in November. They have Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri. So they sit at 5-3 now. Getting to 6-6 is pretty likely. Beyond that, depends on your interpretation. So true or false, Sam Pittman is fired this season?
That's a tough one. I go back and forth on that. Um, I'll go false. Um, what's an interesting thing, component to all this is how much better Arkansas's offense has been this season than last. And who's the difference maker in the offense? Well, you could say Taylon Green, the quarterback from Boise State, or you could say the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, quarterbacks guru, if you will, Bobby Petrino, who has developed him and made him better. And he is better than he was at Boise State. I really believe that Bobby Petrino will be the head coach again at Arkansas. I feel very strongly about that because the way things have played out. The offense has been better. And Arkansas fans all want to look back to their glory days.
Mm-hmm.
And their most recent glory days are not with Frank Broyles. That was way back when. Their most recent glory days were under Bobby Petrino. We got him up to, I think it was 5th nationally in the final top 25 poll. So I just can see Sam Pittman just sort of gracefully bowing out. There's a negotiated deal. He departs, and Bobby Petrino steps into the head coaching role.
But you don't think it'll be this season? You say false. Pittman
No,
is still the coach next
I think it could be next season, but that's a tough one, Blake. I don't know. I mean, I think you could flip a coin on it. Are you convinced either way that he will or won't be back?
Well, I got a couple thoughts. One on Petrino. I almost think you could turn it either way, but I almost think the success with Petrino this year is an argument to keep the status quo. Like, I don't know if you want Bobby Petrino running your program in this day and age. It's a different day than when Bobby Petrino was having great success at Arkansas. And so if you can find a head coach with whom he can work, I mean, Bobby Petrino is very well known, difficult personality, does not play well with others. But it seems like from the outside looking in that Sam Pittman and Bobby Petrino have made this thing work. And so I kind of look at it differently. Like, if this is working, if Bobby P's improving the offense, and yet you don't have to hand him the keys to the motorcycle, just go with the status quo. I don't know that I want him at the top of my program, particularly in this day and time. I don't know if Arkansas would want to go back down that road again. So I almost think it's kind of an argument for Sam Pittman and the status quo, as long as they win enough, right? I mean, if they start losing a lot again, and the offense looks great, and the defense is costing them games, then I think the argument turns on its head a little bit. And the other thing I think about, and this just shows how quickly a coach can go from hot seat to contract extension. There is a clause in Sam Pittman's contract that automatically extends his contract by a year and gives him a raise if he goes 7-5 or better. And so I think the only real option to fire him would be if he turtles up here and goes 6-6 or 5-7. It's in November, beats La Tech, and then gets one of those 3 rivalry games. He's going to trigger the automatic extension, the raise, and thereby becoming even more expensive to fire than he would be otherwise. And so, I mean, that would just be really bizarre optics of Sam Pittman gets to 7-5. Hey, he gets an extension and a raise, and then 2 days later, you fire him and pay him a several $1 million more buyout than he would otherwise. So I guess my point is, if he gets to 7-5, I think he's absolutely safe. And I think he can do it. I think they're going to beat La Tech. And the way the SEC's gone this year and the way Arkansas has gone, I think they can get one of these other 3 games. I think they can get either Ole Miss, Texas, or Missouri. If they don't and they go at 6-6, I guess I'm kind of on the fence whether he survives. All told, I think they can get to 7-5, and if they get to 7-5, I think he's safe. So I agree with you, and I will say false.
Yeah, but it is a really you make some great points there, and I think it really shows how intriguing and how complex this is. Yeah. But because of that, and you make a good point also about Petrino. a lot of coaches like Petrino now might think, I'm tired of all this NIL nonsense. He isn't a head coach right now, but he might be sitting there thinking, this is kind of fun. I'm getting credit. We're having some success. Offense is looking pretty good. Do I really want all the headaches that come with being a head coach? All I got to worry about right now is making my quarterback, my offense better. I don't have to worry about negotiating an NIL deal. He might be happier doing this. And as you know, guys that are really good play callers, that's kind of their identity. And a lot of them become head coaches, and some of them are very successful. But, at their core, they're still really an offense coordinator. That's kind of their forte, and that's what they do best, and that's what they enjoy doing. So I think that's a really good point you made. Maybe this thing would work out. I kind of hope it does.
Yeah, it is an interesting balance. The Sam Pittman as the head hog and Bobby P running the offense. Like I said, there would not be a lot of head coaches that could probably make his personality work, but winning works. And right now, Arkansas is winning more than they were last year without Bobby Petrino. So let's move on to another individual who may or may not be on the hot seat. John, I've been writing about Hugh Freeze for weeks now under the banner of why are we all assuming that Hugh Freeze is going to automatically get a third season? Now, we've discussed before, Auburn's recruiting is going well. I understand all that. And I was on the side of the fence of, I think he's going to get a year 3. I was just uncomfortable with the assumption that, of course, Hugh Freeze was going to get a third year. Well, Hugh and Auburn got what I thought was a really important victory last week at Kentucky. They're now 3-5, and it prevents what would have been an unsightly image of Hugh Freeze going 0-8 in the conference in his second season. Now he's 1-4 in the SEC. His remaining games are Vanderbilt, La Monroe, Texas A&M, Alabama. I mean, maybe they can get a 4th, 5th win, but this thing's probably peaking at best at 5-7 in Hugh Freeze's second year. Of course, it could finish as bad as 3-9 or 4-8. So, true or false, Hugh Freeze, who has a buyout of about $21 million, Hugh Freeze gets fired this season.
Well, as you pointed out last week, his buyout doesn't have to be paid in a lump sum. It can be spread out. That's good contractual negotiations there. It's very wise. These huge payouts. I think we're going to see those become obsolete.
The huge payouts?
The direct payout, lump sum kind of payout. You got to be an idiot to make that kind of deal. It just, too many things can go wrong. What was the question?
Is Hugh going to get fired this year?
I'll say false. I don't think he will get fired, but I can see a scenario where he would. I think Auburn could lose to Vanderbilt Saturday.
I do too, and that game's on the Plains. I mean, losing inside your own building to Vanderbilt, and we can sing all of Vanderbilt's praises and say, they've been a great story this year, punching above their weight. True. And yet, when all is said and done, Vanderbilt's probably going to finish about 6-6, and the name on the front of the jersey still says Vanderbilt. And every Auburn fan who draws breath thinks that Auburn, with a second-year coach, should beat Vanderbilt in their home building.
I can't even imagine a worse scenario than losing to Vanderbilt.
Ooh.
Losing to Vanderbilt, having an open date to think about it, and then playing Louisiana Monroe. Remember, Auburn and Hugh Freeze lost to New Mexico State last year about that time by 21 points. If Auburn loses to Vanderbilt, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that it could lose to Louisiana Monroe. I think the wheels would come off. There's not much hope. It could probably rally because it's hatred for Alabama there in that regular season finale would bring out the best in Auburn. But before that could be, I think it's very important to Hugh Freeze to beat Vanderbilt, because Do you think if the worst happened, if he lost to Vanderbilt and 2 weeks later, after an open date, lost to ULM, do you think he could keep his job? I don't think he could.
No, I don't. I don't think so. I don't think Hugh Freeze is keeping his job at 3-9, and I think even 4-8, beating Law Monroe but losing to Vanderbilt, and then let's say they got clubbed by A&M and Alabama at the finish line. I think even that draws it into question because the buyout to me almost is a moot point. You mentioned, I wrote about it last week. Like the number is big, it's $20+ million, but Auburn can spread it out over the next 4 years. It's like the Bobby Bonilla contract. You cut him a check, well, in Bonilla's case, he gets a check for $1 million once a year. In Hugh's case, he would get a monthly failure check, a monthly severance check for the next 4 years. So you spread that buyout out over 4 years. Gus Malzahn is already paid off. He's off the books. They don't owe Brian Harsin that much more because half of Brian Harsin's money was due up front. So he's almost paid off by this point. So, yeah, I mean, people look at the number, but I think as important with the buyout number is the way that you have to pay the money. I mean, when you have to swallow 50% of a $20 million buyout in 30 days, that's tough going down the hatch, even for an SEC program. When you can spread that $20 million out over the course of like 50 months, well, then it's just a line on the budget. You can figure that out. So I don't think the buyout's going to save him. I think more the drum that you've been pounding throughout the season, the recruiting. If Hugh Freeze gets a third year, it's going to be the recruiting. And so that's the key thing to watch. Do any commitments peel off? Do they hold on to their right now number 5 in the recruiting rankings? That's important. If he goes out and loses to Vanderbilt, gets pummeled by Texas A&M and Alabama and the recruiting class starts to waver a little bit, at that point there's no argument to keep Hugh Freeze. So the win at Kentucky was big. I think the game coming against Vanderbilt is really just as important for Hugh Freeze. He got himself out of the corner, but he gets himself right back into the corner if he loses to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next one, John. Brent Venables is a guy we've been talking about maybe finding the hot seat next year. Well, it's a disaster for Oklahoma this season. We kind of predicted that with the schedule that they faced, although we didn't think it would look quite this bad. But Oklahoma is 4-4. It's going to be the underdog in at least 2, if not 3, of its remaining 4 games. It has an FCS opponent this week. So assuming it gets that, it gets to 5 wins, but it may not get another one. This is year 3 for Brent Venables, but inexplicably, Oklahoma gave him a contract extension, raise, increased his buyout before the season, which, I mean, we see this all the time in college athletics, but it still defies logic. Like, who is coming to break down Oklahoma's door to steal Brent Venables away? I mean, you open that door and there's nobody standing on the other side. It's ding dong ditch. There's nobody there. So now Oklahoma has left itself with this $44 million buyout should it want to fire Brent Venables. And yet here they are, probably looking at a 5-7 or at best 6-6 season. So true or false, Brent Venables will get fired this season.
Before I answer, that buyout, is it a lump sum buyout? Do you know?
I haven't looked. I have to admit, John, a journalistic flaw here. I have not looked into the payout structure of that one.
You don't have time to look up everything. I think the difference in Oklahoma, this job with Venables and the other 2, even Auburn and Arkansas, Oklahoma is one of the biggest football programs ever. I mean, it's not expected to win. It's expected to win championships, even though it hadn't won one in over 20 years. So it's hard for me to answer that, but I think it could come down to one game. I think if he goes 5-7, I think he's gone. I think if he loses that game to Missouri, because I don't see him beating Alabama and certainly not LSU and Baton Rouge, It's not just the record. That would give him 2 losing seasons in 3 years, but it's not just the records. I think fans are going to look at this, and the boosters will look at it the same way. Is you had Dylan Gabriel as your quarterback. Okay, you let him get away. Could you have given him more money and kept him at Oklahoma? I don't know, but there's probably a chance. But it was almost as though Oklahoma said, well, we got Jackson Arnold coming. So it doesn't we lose Dylan Gabriel. We got a 5-star recruit, one of the best freshmen in the country coming in, redshirt freshman. So the way that has gone, the offense has been so abysmal. And he's a defensive coach. And so a question you always have in an offensive era when you hire a defensive coach, well, what about the offense? We know he's a good defensive coordinator, but he's really a head coach. Can he manage an offense? Can he produce? Can he hire somebody to produce a big-time offense? And this season the answer is a resounding no. It just hasn't happened. The uncertainty at quarterback, he starts Jackson Arnold, supposed to be a star. Things go badly against Tennessee. He puts Michael Hawkins in, who's a nice runner, but can't throw the ball, looked lost back there, scrambling around behind a bad offensive line. Then he goes back to Jackson Arnold. All of that raises questions, I think. We talked about Mike Elko using 2 different quarterbacks. It's fine if you look smart when you do that and you win.
Yeah.
When you do that and you lose, people assume guy's not decisive. He really doesn't have a clue what to do with his offense or his quarterbacks. So I think it comes down to beating Missouri. If he beats Missouri and he goes 6-6, he can keep his job with a hefty buyout. But if he loses to Missouri, and he's had 2 losing seasons in 3 years at Oklahoma, I just don't think the Sooners will tolerate that.
See, I think he's going to be saved by the I don't know if he's going to be saved by the offensive failures, but saved by the ability to play the fire the coordinator, make a scapegoat of the coordinator card. You can only do that once, but Jeff Lebby was his old coordinator. Lebby left to become Mississippi State's head coach. He hires Seth Luttrell to become his offensive coordinator. It's been a nightmare. And so, yeah, the head coach deserves blame for that. You hired the guy, right? But every struggling head coach gets to play the fire the coordinator, blame the coordinator card once. And I think that's going to save Venables for this season. You only get to play that card one time. He's played it. If the offense isn't better next year, he's gone. And I don't think it's a good excuse for Venables. You're the coach. You hired the guy. You were the one that was unable to keep Dylan Gabriel, or maybe just weren't all that interested in keeping Dylan Gabriel. You've made a mess of your quarterback room. The reason Oklahoma's in the quarterback situation it's in is because it doesn't have Dylan Gabriel. I mean, Jackson Arnold and Hawkins, we can throw mud at them, and they have to play better. But if Venables would have kept Gabriel, this would all be a moot point. So I don't think it's a good excuse to blame the coordinator, but I think it's an excuse that's going to work for him one time and one time only. But you make a good point with Missouri, John, because those teams used to play annually in the Big 12, and it was one of those wink-wink rivalries, like you called it. Yeah. A rivalry, and for a while they had a little trophy. It was a peace pipe, actually, a peace pipe trophy that at some point along the way disappeared, and nobody knows where the peace pipe is anymore. But Oklahoma never surrendered the peace pipe. They once beat Missouri 77-0, and in my lifetime, John, not yours, you got a few years on me, but I've been around for a minute now. In my lifetime, Missouri's beat Oklahoma exactly 2 times. So, yeah, if he loses to Missouri, I still think he maybe keeps it. But like you, I become a lot less certain if he goes 5-7, loses to Missouri. That's a big buyout to stomach. But so is losing to Missouri is hard to stomach too, for Oklahoma fans for sure.
Blake, if this were if he hadn't had that bad first season, if he already didn't have a losing season on his resume, maybe some people would be more inclined to look at losing your top 5 wide receivers to injury.
Sure.
I never heard of anything like that. So that's a valid excuse. Well, no wonder the offense is a mess. You have all your receivers back, your quarterback's better. The problems with the offensive line aren't as paramount. But I don't think people buy excuses as much as they used to. And I'm not sure they buy what you're selling. That used to work with the coordinator. Well, I don't think anybody looked at this team and said, yeah, that's it. The coordinator was the problem. No, because he had to run an offense that lost its top 5 receivers too. I think people will look beyond the OC. I don't think that's going to help him enough. And that, again, I go back to that Missouri game. Piece 5 and 7, I think Oklahoma does make a change.
All right, I want to get to a couple playoff scenarios, John, before we make our picks, but let's close with the hot seat, and we probably don't need to spend much time on this because I think our answer has been pretty consistent for weeks, but I want to give you the opportunity to change your mind should you want to. The last one we arrive at, of course, is the man who probably sits on the hottest seat in college football at this moment, even though he has a winning record. Florida is 4-3, but the remaining schedule is Georgia this weekend, Texas on the road, LSU and Ole Miss, both of which are in the swamp, and then he closes at Florida State, a game that doesn't look as tough as it did in the preseason, but he's at 4-3 now. The Gators probably be favored only just in one of those remaining 5. It might be favored against Florida State. So Billy Napier, true or false, he's fired this season?
I kind of think he's already been fired. They just haven't told anyone. I mean, I get, if he won out, I guess you'd keep him around. But
yeah, I think if he goes 8-4, you keep him. You could give him one more loss in this murderous stretch down the finish. I don't know how he's going to get to 8-4. I don't know how he's going to get to 7-5. I mean, even if he were to upset one of those teams in the swamp, let's say he beats either LSU or Ole Miss in the swamp, he still didn't have to beat Florida State just to get to 6-6. And I don't think 6-6 is going to cut it for a year 3 coach who had losing records in his first 2 seasons. So looking at the schedule based on the realities of what Billy Napier's done at this point, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable in joining you and saying true, Billy Napier is fired at this season unless he can make some magical escape and get to 8-4.
I don't see any magical escape there with that schedule. It's much like out at Oklahoma's. It was almost preordained for failure.
All right, a couple playoff scenarios before we make our picks, John. As we mentioned, Texas A&M atop the SEC standings. They still play Texas later this year, and they got a tricky one, I think, on the road this week at South Carolina. South Carolina team that's pretty middle of the pack in the SEC, I think, at this point. So true or false, Texas supplies 2 playoff qualifiers from the SEC, meaning Texas and Texas A&M both get into the playoff. True or false?
I'll go true on that one.
I join you in thinking that. I think Texas A&M would be pretty safe at 10-2 if they lose to Texas. They have wins against LSU, a rout over Missouri. They wouldn't have a bad loss. I mean, that loss to Notre Dame looked bad to our eyes, but Notre Dame now is a playoff contender. Texas would be a playoff team if they beat A&M, presumably. So I think 10-2 would be enough to get the Aggies in. Texas is the more interesting one, John. If they lose to the Aggies and are 10-2, what on earth are they hanging their hat on at that point? Like their best win, I guess, would be on the road at Michigan, a Michigan team that might go like 8-4, 7-5. I mean, a vote for Texas at 10-2 to be a playoff team has to be based purely on the eye test, and the eye test hasn't looked so good the last 2 weeks. Hasn't looked good at all. So I think Texas would be the more vulnerable one at 10-2 than Texas A&M would, actually, because I think they have less on their resume. But overall, I join you in saying true that they're both going to get in. But what do you think about my idea that Texas would be more vulnerable at 10-2 than Texas A&M would be?
I agree. I think I mean, Texas was ranked number 1 in the country there for a while, and I thought it would beat Georgia. I mean, I was sold on the Longhorns as maybe being slightly above the rest of the SEC contenders. But then I watched it against Georgia and thought otherwise. Then I watched it again against Vanderbilt, a 3-point win. I mean, it's trending in the wrong direction right now. And so I was looking at the schedule too, and I say, okay, what can Texas hang its hat on? Michigan win looked really good in early September. A lot of people can beat Michigan now. That's no feather in your cap. So, and when you look at that schedule, playing at Arkansas,
yeah,
those teams go way back, and I think Texas will get Arkansas's best shot. That could be a problem game. Wouldn't it be kind of fun though if A&M and Texas went into that last game with 2 losses apiece?
Yeah, and it's an elimination game.
Yeah, an elimination game.
Yeah, that would be spicy stuff. Yeah, I'm with you. My hesitation in saying true, my hesitation comes from the Texas side of things, much more than saying Texas A&M. But I do go slight lean to true. Okay, another one for you. True or false? The winner of the Alabama LSU game in 2 weeks' time will make the college football playoff. We pretty much know the loser is out. That would be the third loss for the loser. The winner would survive another week with 2 losses. But true or false, do you think the winner of that game, whether it be Alabama or LSU, will make the playoff?
I did.
Okay.
Close call, because it's going to be really hard to distinguish 1, 2. I think we could have a lot of 2-loss teams in there in the mix for a playoff bid. But if LSU won, it would have that would certainly be a good win. Ole Miss would be a good win for it. Southern Cal's not a bad loss. It's just a loss. And the A&M, again, it's not a bad loss. LSU's played a pretty tough schedule. Alabama, again, it's, LSU, if it can win in Baton Rouge, a lot of teams can't pull that off. And then Oklahoma doesn't help it. Auburn doesn't help it. But if it can beat LSU and go 10-2, I think it's in. Yeah.
Yeah, this is maybe the toughest one I've thought about, because if Alabama wins, I still think it's going to have the problem of it lost to Tennessee. So if you have Georgia, Texas A&M in the field, and then the last spot comes down to 10-2 Alabama or 10-2 Tennessee, well, Alabama would have the superior strength of schedule, but it lost the head-to-head to Tennessee. So would 10-2 Alabama be left out? I mean, that is a wild thought to think about. I mean, Greg Sankey might just refuse to let any SEC teams play in the playoff if they don't put in 10-2 Alabama. So it's hard to think about, but that would be a log jam, and I don't know how you break through there. And then with LSU, I just think, boy, they've been kind of topsy-turvy, hard to predict from week to week, and they are so one-dimensional with Garrett Nussmeier and not a ton else that I think like they could beat Alabama and then lose to Florida in the swamp or lose to Vanderbilt. I mean, wouldn't that be horrifying for LSU fans? You beat Bama, you think you're back on the right side of the bubble, and then you blow it at the end. But I think it's kind of plausible with the season has gone. I think if LSU gets to 10-2, I think they're in, because they don't have just a crippling loss. They wouldn't have a head-to-head against Tennessee keeping them out. They would actually neutralize the best line on Tennessee's resume by beating Alabama. Well, that neutralizes, Tennessee's win against Alabama. I actually think if LSU goes 10-2, John, I think the Vols could be on the outside looking in at 10-2. If the choice has to come down to LSU at 10-2 or Tennessee at 10-2, LSU is going to have the better strength of schedule. They're going to have neutralized Tennessee's win against Alabama. I think Tennessee could be odd man out if LSU's 10-2.
I think Tennessee could have a problem even if it, even if it's tied with Alabama at 10-2. I know head-to-head is one factor, but you don't just look at one criterion and say, okay, case closed. Alabama would have a win over Georgia, and if Tennessee loses to Georgia, particularly if it loses, and I'm not saying it will, but if it lost decisively by 14 or more points, and Alabama has a win over Georgia, and it lost to LSU at Neyland Stadium, Alabama's schedule is better. It would have a win over LSU and Georgia. Tennessee's only good win would be Alabama. So I
think what I'm hearing here, John, is the senior columnist at the Knoxville News Sentinel is maybe working on a piece of 10-2 Vols. Sorry, you're out. Is that what I'm hearing here?
No, I'm not saying that because I think LSU is going to take care of Alabama. Okay.
Okay, but then isn't LSU going to block out Tennessee?
It's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I think I'm hearing 10-2 Tennessee's in trouble.
I'm not saying. If you'd have told me in preseason a 10-2 Tennessee team wouldn't make the playoff, I said no way, it's in. Now I'm not so sure.
Okay, fair enough. We'll put a pin in this and revisit it in a couple weeks. And let's make some picks for this weekend. It has finally happened, John. Both you and I suffered losing records in the same week. I think that's the first time this season that we both had losing records on the same Saturday. We each went 2-4 last week. But darn it, John, wouldn't you know it? We both hit our locks. We just can't miss on these locks. So we both hit our locks. We went 2-4. I still have a 1-game lead on you. I'm 29-22. You are 28-23. We're both in plus money, swimming in cash. Let's give it all back this week. Ole Miss, a 7.5-point favorite at Arkansas. Why don't you get us started and that lead off here with the Rebels 7.5-point favorite on the road?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think Ole Miss will win the game, and if it were 7-point line, I'd probably take Ole Miss 7.5. You said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to take Arkansas.
I will too. That extra half point is influencing my vote.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is scary. If it was 7, I'd think I could live with the push. I'd take Ole Miss. I think if it was -7, but I don't know. I mean, Ole Miss is kind of content to win ugly this year, and that's not something we've seen from Lane Kiffin in the past, and it backfired on him when he used that strategy against Kentucky, and Kentucky got that 4th and a prayer first down and stole the game. But last week against Oklahoma in Oxford, they won by just 12 points. They were losing at halftime. They got in a close game against LSU and they lost. They got in a close game at Kentucky. They lost. They look pretty good against South Carolina, but overall, it's been kind of it hasn't been any beauty contest for Ole Miss this year. So I do think they win, but I think it's probably ugly again. So I'll take the 7.5 points.
Well, you can count on Ole Miss for too many personal foul penalties. They're overly aggressive on defense. So I've seen some really good teams who picked up a lot of had a lot of personal foul problems because they play so aggressively. But it's really cost Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a good team, but it's not that good where it can repeatedly overcome those kind of penalties.
All right, moving on. Vanderbilt at Auburn. Auburn, the home team, a 6.5-point favorite. Auburn coming off that important win against Kentucky for Hugh Freeze. I'll start us off here, John. I'm taking the plunge on Vanderbilt. 6.5 points. I will stuff those in my pocket because I think there's a chance Vanderbilt just wins this game outright. So if you're going to give me 6.5 points on top of that, knowing how limited Auburn's offense is, 6.5 points feels like a lot, even on the plains. So I will take Vanderbilt and pocket the 6.5 points.
Yeah, if I were a bettor in the old days, I had pretty much adhered to the strategy of never picking Vanderbilt. But you have to adjust. And Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt's quarterback, beat Auburn at the same stadium about this time last year, 31-10, when he was quarterback in New Mexico State. I don't think it's a leap at all to think Vanderbilt can win the game. This this is a pick I feel pretty good about. I'm with you. I go with Vanderbilt and take the points. I don't like Auburn giving the points to hardly anybody.
No, not at all. All right, we're in lockstep so far. This one has been kind of falling under that trap game label, John. The Aggies flying high after rallying to beat LSU. Now they go to South Carolina, team that's been playing pretty good defense all season long. We'll see if they can handle that read option. If they ever seen that before, seemed like LSU hadn't. I think it's a testament that odds makers recognize South Carolina is a team that no one really should want to play. They're a little bit unpredictable, but they're a tough out. That Texas A&M just a 2.5-point favorite on the road at South Carolina, coming off the big win. So why don't you get us started on this one?
I think this is a game where Mike Elko can go with his running quarterback again. South Carolina has sustained a really strong pass rush. It had a 17-point lead against LSU before losing. It joined a long line of teams that have pressured Oklahoma's quarterbacks. But it can really sustain a pass rush. I think Connor Wigman in an Aggies passing game would struggle against Carolina. Maybe not as much the running game. So that's a tough call. But I guess I'd go with Texas A&M there. I just think it senses what it can do now, and I kind of betting on it not to stumble.
Yeah, I agree with you about the quarterback situation, and it doesn't mean that Wigman, we never see him again, but South Carolina is one of the best pass rushing teams in the conference, as is LSU, and we saw that show up, and Connor Wigman is kind of a statue back there. He needs good pass protection, needs time to work. I don't think he's going to get it in this one, so I think Marcel Reed's the better choice. But I really like Texas A&M's defense. I don't love South Carolina's offense, so I think Texas A&M could win this in a variety of ways. Like if it needs to pull out a 14-10 struggle, I think it can do that. If it's got to score a few points, I think it can do that too. So I think Texas A&M takes it, and the 2.5, giving the 2.5 points isn't enough to scare me off. So I'll take the Aggies as well. All right, John, the cocktail party, not getting a ton of spotlight this week, sort of speaks to where these programs are, but Florida is playing better lately. It is a 17-point underdog in Jacksonville against rival Georgia. And boy, I'm scared about this one, John, but it feels like every week on this show, I take the Gators. And early in the season, that meant taking the Gators as the favorite. The last several weeks, it meant taking the Gators and the points. And I'm going to take Florida and those 17 points. And I know the last time out we saw Georgia, they clubbed Texas, looked great doing it. But I don't know. I mean, Georgia just still feels a little bit Jekyll and Hyde to me. And so I think they win, but I'm not confident enough in them to cover the 17 points. So I'll take the 17 points in Florida.
A lot of people are thinking along your lines because I saw an opening line in one service that had Georgia as a 20.5 point favorite. So the line is moved somewhat in Florida's direction. One thing I keep in mind with Kirby Smart, it's worked this way against Tennessee, and he was an SEC player, played at Georgia, really good safety. Those guys really remember rivalry games even when they become coaches. It's so important to them, and he knows how much he remembers as a player how much this Georgia-Florida game meant. Mm-hmm. And I think his team will pick up on that, and I'm going to give the points. So that'll be our one difference maker is the Georgia-Florida game.
Well, let's see if we can get one more differentiation before we get to our lock. Kentucky at Tennessee. Tennessee, 15.5-point favorite in a battle for the retired beer barrel. John, you've covered this game 1,700 times. You've seen it end the same way almost every one of those 1,700 times. So what do you think about Kentucky, a 15.5-point underdog at Tennessee?
Yeah, I would pick Tennessee every time against Kentucky and never think any more about it. I would be wrong sometimes, but it's not something I waste a lot of thought on. Tennessee is 36-3. I've been here for, I guess, all but 2 of those games. It's 36-3 in the last 39 games against Kentucky. Brings out the worst in Kentucky. I think back to 2 years ago when Tennessee won this game 44-6. Kentucky came absolutely unhinged. I think of the history of that's the game that comes to mind when I think about Tennessee and Kentucky. I just think in Neyland Stadium with Tennessee, we've talked about it already. Tennessee needs to win impressively when it wins now. It's got a light schedule. Style points do matter, and it needs to create an image that it's a really good team. And beating Kentucky, a team that was able to beat Ole Miss and almost beat Georgia, beating Kentucky by a substantial margin would matter. So I'll pick Tennessee to cover.
Yeah, I'm going to take Tennessee to cover as well. I don't like Kentucky the way they've been playing at all lately. I mean, they rattled off losing at home to Vanderbilt, losing on the road. Well, not just losing, they got crushed in the swamp, and then they lost at home to Auburn. I mean, that's I know we think Vanderbilt's a cute story, but that's 3 losses in a row to 2 or to 3 bottom half of the SEC teams. Well, now they're playing a team from the top half of the league in Neyland Stadium. As you said, we know how these games usually go. They favor Tennessee, and oftentimes they favor Tennessee by a big margin. So I will pick the Vols to cover the spread as well. And that leaves us with our locks of the week. John, you were bold last week. You recognized your strategy might have needed a little fine-tuning. You went away from picking against Kent State, and those Indiana Hoosiers, the Fighting Sigs, they delivered for you, winning yet another one. They're 8-0. I had an AP ballot, John. I'd be ranking them higher than number 13, where I believe they are currently ranked. I know they haven't played much, but Indiana just keeps destroying everyone. So you going back to the Indiana well this week, John, or you see something else you like?
No, I'm not. I'm not sure about the quarterback situation. It won last week with Tavian Jackson, and it showed that it's not just a passing team. It can win with running. It can win with defense, and it's terribly underrated. No way Indiana should not be in the top 10. Doesn't mean it'll beat Ohio State. Doesn't mean it'll win the Big Ten. But I really look at this as a playoff team. And it showed me something when it won without its starting quarterback last week. But I'm not sticking with them. I'm going to go with a pick that will surprise you.
Okay. You're picking Kent State? Oh, okay.
No. Clemson has, ever since that second half against Georgia, when it fell apart, has played really well. But I'm not picking it to play really well against Louisville. I'm taking Louisville at 11 points.
Wow. That
I knew that would surprise you.
Yeah, you set me all up there for taking Clemson to cover.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
You get some inside info on this one? This feels like an inside info type of bet.
I did make a few calls.
Made a few calls.
Yeah,
okay.
Joey. I talked to Joey. No, I looked at Louisville's schedule. It's played a tougher schedule than Clemson, aside from the Georgia game. Clemson's had a lot of easy wins. Louisville's lost a lot of tough games, and I don't think it'll win the game, but I think it can stick around and maybe make this a 10-point game. If the line was 10 points, I'd look elsewhere for my lot. But with 11 points, I'm taking Louisville.
All right. Well, that was indeed an interesting one. We're both picking underdogs in our locks of the week this week, John. I feel like about 75% of the time we look for that favorite that we think just that is undervalued by the sports books, and we pick them to win in a blowout. But I like you, am taking some points this week. And in fact, I'm taking 21.5 points and Duke on the road at Miami. I think Miami might lose one at some point. Everybody assumes Miami is going to roll into the ACC championship game undefeated, and then it becomes, a clash between Miami or Clemson or somebody, in which case, maybe both teams get into the playoff. Maybe Miami doesn't have to win. They can make it at 12-1. Well, I'm just not totally sold that Miami is rolling into the ACC championship undefeated. They got Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse left. They'll be favored in all those games. There's no juggernaut left on the schedule, but I mean, Miami gives up a lot of points, and I know they just crushed State, but who cares about that? Florida State stinks. Before that, your team Louisville hung 45 on Miami. The Cal Berkeley boys scored 38 on Miami. Virginia Tech scored 34 on Miami. Now, because of Cam Ward's brilliance, they won all of those games. But to be a 21.5-point favorite against a 6-2 Duke team that nearly beat SMU, a very good SMU team last week, I 21.5. I don't know. What am I missing? I'm taking Duke in a second now.
I think Duke is a very underrated team. I agree with you. It's not as though Miami's just blowing away the field every Saturday. It's winning, and Cam Ward's creating a lot of highlights. But I like Duke in that game too. I think that, in fact, I probably like your lock better than mine.
Too late. Can't have it, John. Okay. All right. Well, it's heating up on the hot seats, heating up in the playoff race. We'll be with you throughout the rest of the season. Thanks for stopping by and checking us out on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.